Well, here's your boy David again. The address has changed now that I am in the custody of the enemy, but I'm alive, in perfect condition. And unless the war ends soon, I shall probably be that way for some time. I'm a prisoner of war, but if you will consult the Red Cross, they will tell you how to write me. You might make up a special parcel of a good straight-edge razor, a few toothbrushes, and anything else they'll let you send. Check with the finance office and see if you can draw my pay every month. I draw flight pay for 6 months and regular base pay after that. I'm allowed 2 letters a month, so don't expect frequent mail. Above all, don't worry. We are well fed. Everyone I know is here, and we have books to read. Remember me to the bunch and give everyone my address. Love and keep smiling. David, now grounded. I was in the 306 bomb group of the 367th Squadron, flying B-17s. And it was the 5th time Germany had ever been raided, April 17th, 1943. We took off early in the morning after a mess of scrambled eggs made out of dried powdered eggs and so forth. And the flight over went fairly well. There were 38 airplanes, 38 B-17 flying fortresses in the air. That was the biggest raid of the war to date over Germany. And our target was a Messerschmitt plant just outside of Bremenhaven, which is on the coast of the North Sea there. Well, we made our approach well. We had no escort. This was before the days of P-47s and P-51s that could fly escort. So we had Spitfires from the Royal Air Force that accompanied us halfway out over the water, and then they just left us because they couldn't go any farther, still get back home, and they left us. Well, our target, we'd supposed to have been bombing it the day before, but we were closed out because of weather. But the Germans evidently knew we were coming and had all that time to prepare. So they brought in tons of anti-aircraft guns on flat cars and started putting up barrages just as soon as we crossed the coast into Germany. And the flak was very heavy. Flak is like flying through a shotgun shell that's gone off right in front of your face, except that it's about 100 times bigger, and it hits the airplane and makes all kinds of bad, loud sounds like metal hitting metal, and just tears the airplane to shreds. Well, I was flying number 2 position, which is just off the right wing of the leader of the squadron, and as we approached the target, the flak got worse and worse and worse, and crippled us a little bit, so we had to drift back a little bit. But in any event, we got the bomb days open and bombed the factory, and we're on our way back out when the fighters showed up. Well, the Luftwaffe had the best airplanes in the air, the fastest at that time. And it's just like the Indians in the wagons. The fighters went round and round the formation of 38 planes. Then on some kind of a signal, they would break off, and some would head right straight in at you, and some would come in from down and come up, and some go up and come down. They were just going right through the full formation, just in some incredible ways. Amazing they didn't run into each of us. I remember one in particular that started way out there, and he was heading right for me, and I was sitting here. And so I saw he was heading right for me, and about, half a mile out there, his wings lighted up, which means his cannons were firing, and they fire explosive shells, and the shells go boom, 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 bursting. You can see them coming closer to the plane. As they got closer, they would go right on by, and some would hit the plane and cripple a little bit here and there, and some would miss. But this guy was heading right for me, so I tucked in a little tighter, and I tucked in a little tighter, and I tucked in a little tighter until he was right out there. Well, a B-17 is the best fortified plane in existence. That's what we call it, a flying fortress. It has an upper 50 millimeter cannon turret and a lower one, 50 millimeter Stinger in the front, in the tail, and 2 waist guns on each side. So it has a lot of firepower. and every fifth shell is a tracer bullet, meaning it puts out a red tracer. As this plane was coming in, you could see all the tracers from all of the different planes in the formation aimed right at him. And it was aimed right there. When he got out to be, well, maybe not more than 50 or 60 feet out over here after I tucked way in, heading right for me, he suddenly just blew up. I could see his head as clearly as I could see a person's head 25 or 30 feet away. And the whole airplane just blew up, just like that. And if I'd been still right in front of it, it would have taken out the rest of my airplane. But we gradually drifted back, and the fighters kept circling us and working on the stragglers, which is what we were. And finally, the airplane got to in a condition where when I moved the stick back and forth, nothing happened, and the plane was just in a long, fast glide down to the right a little bit, way away from everybody else. All the formation had gone on. And finally, we lost all 4 engines, and there was no reason to stay in the airplane because I couldn't control it anymore. So we rang the fire bell for the people to get out. We sent the engineer back to see if anyone was alive, and there were 4 out of 5 dead in the back of the airplane, a crew of 10 on the airplane. And well, the B-17 is an unusual airplane. It's hard to get into and out of unless you go in through the door through the fuselage. But right under the pilot's area, just behind the pilot, there's a little ramp leading up to it that's about 1.5 feet wide with like an accordion door in it. And then down on what would be the equivalent of where the floor is from where I'm sitting, there's a little compartment about 1.5 feet high that you crawl through to get up to the navigator's compartment, which was like a plexiglass bubble. In the middle of that, there's a hatch, once again, about 18 inches square. And that's the way the pilots and the navigators get in the airplane. You jump up and grab on it and swing your feet up and pull yourself into the airplane there. And that's the way we get in and out of the airplane rather than going back through the door in the back. On the bailout procedure, the procedure is to go out through that, for the pilot and navigator, to go out through that hatch. And the day before was interesting. Each month they had a contest in the camp as to for what they call a bailout drill or a dinghy drill to see how fast you can get out of the airplane. And they ring a bell and everybody tumbles out of the airplane as fast as they could into nets, and they time it, and the crew got an award as being the fastest. Well, the day before, I had done it, and I'd figured out, being a diver in high school, that I could stand in this little area up here and dive through the hatch. It was almost straight below here. I could dive through that hatch, and that would save me quite a number of seconds. So the day before, during the dinghy drill, I tried that, and the sergeant that took me out of the net said, Lieutenant, you got the fastest time, no question about that. Your crew's got the fastest time, but I wouldn't do it that way if I were you, if I really have a problem. I said, well, why? He said, well, look behind you. And I'd caught my ripcord inside the plane, and the chute was still up in there while I was hanging by the shrouds in there. We wore a very tiny chute. It was a chest pack, an emergency pack. It was only about 17 feet wide altogether, and very narrow panels, and we kept it under the seat because you couldn't fly with it on. So when you're ready to bail out, you pick it up, and it clips on to a harness that you're wearing. And you make sure the harness is nice and tight. So they had also warned us when we bailed out to be sure that we weren't falling face down when we pulled on the chute, because if we did, it came out of the chest pack that would go right across your face, and the silk and the shrouds would take your skin all off of your face. So, as I said, I was a diver in high school, and I didn't have any problem with that. So, when I went out of the plane for sure, after we'd gotten everybody else out, I went down and I knelt right alongside that little patchway and just rolled out the way I was supposed to. Then as I unrolled, I looked around, spread my arms so I could sort of glide a little bit, and made sure I could see, that I could see nothing but sky. In other words, I don't want to see the ground at all, because I'm falling face down then. I want to see nothing but sky, and I pulled the ripcord. Only one problem. The plane had gained a lot of momentum during the time everyone was getting out. Must have been going 300 miles an hour. And the chute was so tiny that the impact of opening the chute popped 3 of the panels on the chute, so that it would collapse with every little wind change. And as you're coming down, the winds change at the different altitudes. I'd come down about 50 feet, being coming nicely, and the wind would hit my body and swing it over here, and the chute would collapse. And down I'd go about 50 feet. I'd swing the other side, collapse. Down I'd go about 50 feet. You know, and I was coming down that way, and I'd get it all straightened out and coming down nice and smooth. And finally, I got down where I could see the ground. And fortunately, approaching the ground, the wind was fairly steady, so that I didn't have any problem of it collapsing. But I could see over here on the left a road running along, and a river coming across here in front of me, and another road over in the far distance, and like a forest in this area with a road coming through it. And on this road I saw all kinds of people starting to gather, watching me come down. And I knew they'd want to pick me up and catch me. So as I was coming in, I figured if I could stretch it a little bit, and I'm just over this river. And I just made it barely over the river by about 25 or 30 feet. And I landed, and I had the front shrouds in my hand and pulled down as I landed, which collapsed the front of the chute, and I just rolled. Well, I'd been told to do it, no problem at all. And so I got up and I took the chute off and the harness off, and I looked and I saw the people coming, maybe the equivalent of maybe 2 football fields over here, coming into the big open field that was there. And I looked around and I saw the forest over here. I knew there was a road on the other side of it. And throughout this big flat open area, there were like watchtowers built. If you took 4 telephone poles and put them up on end and put a little log cabin on the top of it, they were watchtowers used by the Germans at night to watch for the British raiders that were coming over and tracking them. And so I figured, well, where's the safest place to be here? I figured, well, the place they'd never look for me is up in one of those towers. So I took my Mae West and my helmet and a few other things and threw them as though I was running toward the woods, and pushed the parachute down under a bush. And then I crawled on my hands and knees over to one of these towers and crawled up the ladder into the tower and closed the door. I watched the Germans search that field. They're mainly farm people. But they searched that field for 2.5 hours, and I could see them through the chinks in the logs, watching them search it. And they couldn't find me. They didn't find me. And finally, they decided they wanted to talk about this a little bit to find out where I could be. So they gathered together to talk. And where do you think they gathered? Right immediately below my tower. I could hear all their voices going in German. Didn't understand a word of it. But evidently they decided to look around the field from one of the towers. And which one do you think they picked? The one I was in. So I felt the tower shaking and heard someone coming up the ladder. So I flattened myself against the wood log wall so that if they just opened the door and looked in, he wouldn't see anybody, he'd close the door. But evidently my brown jacket showed through the chinks, because he got up near the top, and all of a sudden he let out a big yell, and down he went again. This time he started up again, and I looked down through the chinks, and I saw him. He had a double-barrel shotgun, about a 6-gauge, I think, because it looked about the size of big night binoculars. 6-gauge shotgun. Raus, he was saying, raus. Well, I didn't know any German, but I thought that probably meant he wanted me to get out. So I opened the door carefully with my hands up, gave him a big smile, and said, okay, you got me. And I came down the ladder, and they ended up taking me to a farmhouse and feeding me some real dark bread and a little porridge and stuff. And they called the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, to come and get me. Well, the German Air Force came and got me, and they took me to a operational Air Force base that they had, to the operations room. And here it was a room about maybe 20 feet wide by 40 feet long, with maps all around the room, and all